Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a truly fascinating historical mystery. We're going to examine one of the most famous claims about the Bible. But instead of getting bogged down in endless debate, we're doing something much more focused. We're going to look strictly at what the text actually says versus the mathematical deductions that were made centuries later. It's a classic showdown of text versus math, and the conclusion might completely shift how you view historical assumptions.
So, is the Earth exactly 6,000 years old? You know, this isn't just some niche trivia question. Millions of people around the world confidently believe that the Bible explicitly states the Earth is exactly 6,000 years old. When people discuss biblical history, whether they're defending it or critiquing it, this figure is almost always the baseline assumption that everyone brings to the table. We hear it so often that we just kind of accept it as a hard-coded fact of the primary source material.
Well, get ready for a massive rug pull that completely shatters that assumption, because the shocking truth is, it never actually says that anywhere, not once. Seriously, you can imagine the surprise of someone looking to find that specific detail only to realize the text simply doesn't contain it. The 6,000-year figure is literally absent from the written words.
Part 1. The famous missing claim. Searching Genesis to Revelation.
If you actually embark on a reading journey specifically looking for this exact quote, "The Earth is 6,000 years old," you're going to find absolutely nothing. You can scour every single book, every chapter, every verse. You won't find a single sentence making this explicit statement. It is a total ghost quote. It's an idea that everyone knows is there, but factually, it just does not exist in the primary source material.
Which brilliantly illustrates our central mystery. If this incredibly famous number isn't a direct quote from the scriptures, where exactly did it come from? I mean, a wildly specific number like 6,000 doesn't just materialize out of thin air to be universally accepted by millions of people, right? It had to have a starting point. Someone, somewhere, had to put that number on paper.
Part 2. The 1600s Scholars' Math, Tracking Down the Culprit.
To solve this mystery, we've got to travel back in time to the 1600s. The culprit behind this ubiquitous number is Archbishop James Ussher. This guy decided to do some incredibly intense, maybe even mildly obsessive, historical math. He wasn't discovering some lost book of the Bible. Rather, he took it upon himself to calculate a definitive timeline of creation by meticulously analyzing the historical records that were already there. It was basically a massive historical and mathematical audit. Step 1, he sat down and systematically read through the dense genealogies. Step 2, he extracted the data, actually adding up the specific lifespans provided for each of those biblical figures. And Step 3, by stringing all those lifespans together in a continuous chain, he traced time backwards to calculate the exact year of creation. Talk about a massive undertaking of 17th century arithmetic.
Through all this painstaking arithmetic, Ussher landed on a highly specific conclusion: the year 4404 BC. Now, here's where the magic happens. When you take 4404 BC and add the roughly 2,000 years that have passed since we flipped from BC to AD, boom, you arrive at that famous number, approximately 6,000 years. That is the exact mathematical origin of the claim. It wasn't written by ancient prophets, it was calculated by a 17th century archbishop with a real penchant for math.
Part 3. Math is not the text. The blurring of historical lines.
So how did a scholar's math turn into modern popular belief? Well, over the centuries, society essentially played a giant game of telephone. In the 1600s, Ussher publishes his academic calculations. Fast forward to the 1800s, and his date actually began being printed in the margins of some Bibles as a helpful historical reference. Because it was physically printed right next to the text, readers slowly began to treat the calculation as if it were a direct Bible verse itself, which brings us to the present day, where millions falsely assume the 6,000-year figure is explicitly written scripture.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is continuously juxtaposing these two distinct concepts. On one side, we have a scholar's calculation, an external, mathematical deduction made by a human being centuries later. On the other side, we have a direct Bible verse, the actual written words of the primary source material. Mistaking a scholar's calculation for what the Bible directly says entirely changes how we interpret the historical record.
Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to us? Well, if you're a Christian, knowing the difference between what your text actually says and what a 1600 scholar deduced is absolutely vital. If you're an atheist engaging in debates, it's equally important to know what the text actually claims versus what culture has projected onto it. And for the simply curious, it is a fascinating case study in how easily human deduction can be mistaken for ancient source material.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. Honestly, before you started this explainer, did you know this? It kind of makes you stop and wonder, how many other famous facts do we just accept as absolute truth without ever actually checking the primary source?